Okay, how many of you have a smartphone? Anybody here have a smartphone? Okay, how many of you have a laptop? These are things that we use quite a bit in life. Does anybody remember what it was like when you had to remember people's phone numbers? Or if they called you and you were not home, they couldn't get a hold of you. But it's crazy how much technology has advanced. And let's just be honest real quick. How many of you kind of sometimes feel dumb because you don't know how to use all this technology? We look at kids, and an 8-year-old can pick up your smartphone and do amazing things, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know my phone could do that. But instead of making fun of us that did not grow up in this time or before this time, and I know that I come out of Nintendo times, but sometimes that works both ways. Getting on my piece of technology and getting on Facebook, I saw this little video of a kid with a post driver. And if you don't know what a post driver is, it's a tube that's weighted at one end, and it's got some handles on the sides. And yeah, Ryan knows. Ryan's back there. Everybody look at Ryan. He's doing the motion for us. How do you use that? I was going to demonstrate that, but I would not have done as good as you just did. Thank you, Ryan. You take the handles and you put this tube over the post and you drive it in the ground. It's a pretty advanced piece of technology, but if you don't know how to use it, it's not going to do you much good. I watched a video of a guy who was taking the postal driver and he was swinging it at the post. And it was not working out so well. Now don't laugh too hard. Because sometimes we don't know how to use the tools in our hands, right? Sometimes we feel kind of dumb when we don't understand, and it's just how we've learned, how we've grown, how we've been educated, right? But the thing that I had thought about in this video is this kid who was trying to drive the post. Keep this in mind. He had the right tool in his hand. He had the right tool in his hand. He just didn't know how to use it. And that's the truth in a lot of things. And when it comes to the Bible, a lot of times we have the right tool in our hand, but we just don't know how to use it. Anybody ever pick up a Bible and start reading through it and you feel kind of overwhelmed? Or you're like, where do I even start? Or I would love to understand this, but I need somebody to come along and help me with it. Well, the Bible is an amazing book. The right tool we have, but the problem is sometimes we don't know how to use it. Now, we know that there's a lot of truth in the Bible. The Bible is full of what is called doctrinal teaching. The Bible is also full of what we would call ethical instruction. And it's good to understand the difference between the two. The Bible also has a little something called poetry. Some of the books in the Bible are just beautifully written. They're very entertaining. A lot of the Bible is historical teachings. There's so many things in the Bible that are written because it happened, but it's not necessarily telling you to do the same thing. It's good when we have the Bible and we understand the Bible, but we need to understand how to read the Bible, understand it in its proper context, and then once we've understood it, we can look at how do we apply this to our lives. We are going to read something in the Bible today that's a very, very neat story. One of those things that a lot of people would dispute if they don't believe in the inspiration of the Bible, they don't believe the Bible is factual. This is definitely one of the things that they're going to have a problem understanding. And then when we do read it, when we do understand it, then we need to also understand how do we take this truth and apply it to our lives. It's a a very interesting and fun story. It's not going to be an incredibly exciting sermon, but this is going to be an example of how to take a truth and apply it to our lives. So here we are. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14 and verse 22. And it says, "And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitude away." This is an interesting thing. This is one of the accounts of Jesus feeding many people. Now, this is not the famous feeding of the 5,000, and we know that actually the Bible says that he fed the 5,000 men plus women and children. It was many more, but this was a slightly smaller group, but he had done the same thing. He had fed people, and what was happening is everywhere Jesus would go, a huge number of people would follow because they would want to be around Jesus. He was teaching them, he was healing them, he was providing something for them they desperately needed. And what was happening is they were so focused on what they needed from Jesus, they were beginning to neglect other things like food. So Jesus was taking care of all of these needs for him. And as you can imagine, this was becoming overwhelming. Could you imagine what it would be like? Constantly being surrounded by thousands of people, and they were all desperate for something from you. Now, who understands what that would be like? I think every mother especially understands what that's like. Imagine having people around you and they just need more and more and more and more from you, right? Take that and multiply it by a few thousand. That's what Jesus was dealing with. Now, you guys know very well how much I love making fun of my own family. Hunter especially just cannot figure out the importance of doing things for himself. He'll say, "Mom, I'm really, really hungry. Can you make me something to eat?" And she said, "No, Hunter, I'm busy right now, but there's food in the refrigerator." He says, "No thanks, I'll wait." "Hunter, you're really, really hungry, right?" He says, "Yeah, but I just really hate making food for myself." Sometimes we're like that, and if somebody else will do it for us, we will let them. And thousands of people were following Jesus. They wanted more and more from him. They were neglecting the things they needed to do. So Jesus sends them away. But he also does something interesting. He sends his disciples away too. Why? Because while Jesus was taking care of the needs of all the others, he was neglecting something that he desperately needed. And he decided now is the time. He sent the multitude away. He had the disciples get in a ship and he sent them away. It says, "And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone." Now, as I said, we take what the Bible says, we understand it in its proper context, and then we see how can we apply this to our lives. I'm going to say that it is a pretty powerful truth that we need to comprehend that the God of this universe in human form in the person of Jesus Christ had gotten to the point where he was in desperate need of time alone in prayer. If Jesus desperately needs to be left alone a little while so he can get with the Father and communicate with him, spend time together with the Father, if he was desperately in need of that, how important do you think it is for us? But the problem is that sometimes we can become so focused on other things that we don't even realize our own needs. One of the things that I tell people all the time is when you're caring for other people, make sure that you're not neglecting yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, then eventually it's going to get to the point where you're no good to yourself or to others. So always keep that in mind. When you're caring for others, don't neglect self-care. And if Jesus needed time for himself to pray, how important do you think it is for you? Now, just because Jesus is there, he's walking on the earth, doesn't mean that everything is now perfect. Something comes up, and immediately they're in need of Jesus again. It says, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. So the disciples are out. And this is something that is very interesting. Here on this sea, the Sea of Galilee, there is something that happens quite frequently. They will be out fishing, or people will be out on the sea, and immediately a huge storm will come up out of nowhere. Now, the disciples, didn't have smartphones that they could get on Google and look up the weather report. We're very fortunate that we have the ability to say, hey, Google, what's today's weather going to be like, you know? They didn't have that, but there were signs. They could look in the sky. They could predict what the weather would be like. But on the Sea of Galilee, it didn't always work because it would go from very, very calm to very, very chaotic really quickly. And many people had lost their lives in the Sea of Galilee. So here they are, they're in the ship. Jesus is away from them. He's spending time to himself, and immediately this huge storm comes up. Now, looking at this, how can we apply this to our lives? Think about this for just a minute. Now, this is not the actual application that was meant from this writing, but let's just put ourselves in this place for just a moment. Are there times in our lives that we're going along, and without any warning, bam, big storm happens. Something comes up, and we're not prepared for it, and we become desperate. I think that we can see that is something that we can understand. So what do they do about it? What happens? Listen to this. It says, and in the fourth watch of the night, so this is not the way that we tell time. They had to tell time by the position of the sun, how many hours of the day. And in the nighttime, it was really hard to keep a track of time. So when they say that it is in the fourth watch, this is somewhere between 3 and 6 a.m. So Jesus has been out for a while. They've been on the sea for quite a while now. And now this horrific storm has come. It says, in the fourth watch by the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. Now, when I read that, that's something that's pretty hard to comprehend. Now, we talk about, and this is very well known, the miracles of Jesus, and one of them is walking on water. On the cover of your bulletin, you see this picture that we printed of somebody walking on water. I can't walk on water. Can any of you? So here's this picture of somebody walking on water, which is something that's absolutely impossible. But this picture doesn't really show us the picture of what was happening. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was such a huge storm that the disciples were scared to death that they were going to die. It was not this sweet little amazing moment. It was a moment of desperation where the disciples were scared to death, and in the middle of a chaotic storm, Jesus comes walking up. I just want you to picture how dramatic this is, how amazing this is. This is a pretty incredible thing. And we try to picture in our mind and kind of dumb it down to something kind of sweet. No, this was craziness. It was chaotic. And all of a sudden, in the middle of all of this, Jesus comes walking up. And what did the disciples do in reaction? How did they react to that? Well, I would imagine probably the way that most of us would. It says, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled. There's an understatement. They were troubled. They were already afraid that they were going to die because of this crazy storm. And what happens? Now they see a man walking up to them. It says, and they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit." See, they didn't immediately think to, God's come to rescue us. They immediately thought, well, if a big storm at 4 o'clock in the morning isn't bad enough, now a ghost has shown up. They're scared. They're freaking out. So it's a spirit. And they cried out for fear. Now, years ago, Liz and I had a conversation about this. And we're like, hey, did the disciples believe in ghosts? Did they believe in spirits? Was this a common thing? And maybe they did. I don't know how long the belief about ghosts have been around. But I heard somebody tell a story this way. He said, I never believed in ghosts until I saw one. Well, I'm not telling you that I believe in ghosts, but sometimes you can see things you can't understand. And as the expression goes, seeing is believing. I'm not going to say that this verse is suggesting that before that moment, the disciples believed in spirits or in ghosts, but in that moment, they sure did. They were freaking out, scared to death. The moment was absolutely desperate. The coolest thing in this entire story is what happens next. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. So Jesus is telling them, there's a huge storm going on. I know you're scared to death, but I'm here. I'm here. It's me. Don't worry about it. Then this. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come to thee on the water. Isn't that neat? Peter has such a faith in Jesus that he says, Lord, if it's you, I just want to be with you. I don't care about the storm. I don't care about the fears, the worries. I don't care about any of that. Let me just come be with you. That's faith. Now, I'm not saying in my life I will ever experience something quite like this. There's not a whole lot of opportunities to experience things like this here in Missouri, but maybe I'll find myself on a boat during a big storm. I don't know. But I would say there's little doubt that in my life I will find myself in a very scary situation. Who knows what it'll be? I can't predict what that scary situation will be, but in life, scary situations come up. Things will happen. Will I have enough faith to not worry about all the scary things and say, okay, Jesus, I'm ready. I just want to be with you. Will I have the faith that Peter had right here to not worry about the storm and focus on Jesus? But here's the big question. Did Peter really have that faith? Look at what happens next. And he said, this is Jesus speaking, come. We're in the middle of a storm. Come, yeah, come. And it says that Peter was come down out of the ship and walked on the water to go to Jesus. So in the middle of a big storm, what's the last thing you want to do? Jump out of the boat into the water. That's a pretty unnatural thing. One thing I've never done in my life is I've never gone skydiving. I want to go skydiving someday. As a matter of fact, if any of you want to take me on a skydiving trip, that would be really neat. George, awesome. Get your plane ready, buddy. But I heard somebody talk about skydiving one time. It says the stupidest thing you can do. Why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane? Because you have faith in the parachute, right? You know that you're safe. Peter does something not very logical. He steps out of the boat into the raging sea because he has faith. Something goes horribly, horribly wrong. It says, and when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. Now, I can relate to that, guys. I can relate to that. No, let's just be honest. I probably wouldn't have gotten out of the boat in the first place. Let's be honest. I probably would have said, nah, Jesus, you come get in. No. Jesus, it's scary out there. You come get in. Because that's where I want him to be. When the storm has come, I want Jesus in the boat with me. But Peter had enough faith to say, if it's you, bid me to come to you. And Jesus said, come. And Peter gets out of the boat. Peter experiences something I will never experience in my life. He walked on water. Now once again, proper application of the Word of God. I do not believe because Peter walked on water means that I can walk on water. I can't do it. I've tried. When I was a little kid, this is no joke, I believed that if you ran fast enough, you could skip across water like a rock. And you know what? I don't know if it's possible to run fast enough to skip across water, but I know that I cannot run that fast. I have found that out thoroughly. I don't believe that I'm ever going to walk on top of the water. But I do believe this, and I believe that this is the proper application. No matter what I'm going through in life, I have access to Jesus. Because there is nothing in this life that He is going to allow between us that would cut off my access to Him. I also believe this, that maybe I may not go to Him because of fear, because I'm focused on other things. It may be that I have actually denied myself access to Jesus because I'm too focused on the storm. But He always has the attitude, come. Through Him, I can overcome any of the obstacles that get in the way. So here he is. He gets out of the boat. He is literally walking on the water. He is doing it. And a miracle is happening, and he's a part of it. But he sees the wind and is boisterous. He was afraid, and he began to sink. Now that would be my level. Do something kind of dumb. Put myself in danger. But he does the best thing that he possibly can. He does the best thing he possibly can. He cried. I'm not a big crier. I don't like to cry. Okay? But he cried out. It says he cried saying, Lord, save me. Now, this is the easy one. See, him getting out of the boat, that took a lot of faith. Him crying out for help when he's about to drown, that's the easy part. But when I look at this verse and I say, okay, how can I understand this verse in its context? And then, how can I apply this? So I'm not saying this is what the verse is teaching, because it's not teaching this, but it is an application that I think is completely true. Sometimes people have to get in a moment of complete desperation, completely helpless, completely hopeless, before they look to Jesus and cry out for help. I would have rather been in the water, sinking fast, crying out for Jesus' help, than never being in a storm in the first place. Why? Because the storm, the wind, the water is what it took for Peter to realize how desperate he was for Jesus. Think about that for a minute. This is something that I've seen time and time again in my life. I worked in law enforcement. You guys know I was a correctional officer here at Greene County for a while. And during that time, I saw people over and over again in complete desperation. I tell people oftentimes that my strongest ministry was there. Because here at the church, and you guys are wonderful, and I love you all. You treat me better, you smell better, you're a whole lot nicer than they were. That's just the truth. But over and over again, I saw people who had hit rock bottom and were desperate for help. And it gave me the opportunity to be there to tell them, I know the one who can help you. It's not me. I can't walk on the water. I can't solve your problems. But I can point you to the one who can. See, Peter's great faith in Jesus that he demonstrated there, it's because he had gone through some things with Christ before. I believe that in this moment, his faith grew even stronger. Not just because he was able to walk on the water, if only for a moment, but also because he experienced what it was like to be completely desperate and have no other hope than to cry out to Jesus. And Jesus did something that actually strengthened Peter's faith. It says, and immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him. Now I think that's another miracle too. Because what is Christ standing on? How is he going to catch and save Peter? Peter's sinking. But when there's no other way, and there's nothing else possible, it's always possible with the Lord. It says he stretched forth his hand and caught him, and saith unto him, and don't you just love Jesus? He never passes up on a moment to teach a little lesson. He never passes up on a moment to teach Peter a lesson. O thou of little faith. And I'm sure Peter was like, do you have to give me a hard time right now? I mean, come on. I didn't get out of the boat. All those other guys are still in the boat. I'm the only one who got out, and you're going to give me a hard time about not having enough faith? Is this really the right time for this? O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? See, when I look at this, I know something. If Peter demonstrated little faith, I probably would have demonstrated almost no faith. But Jesus showed that he is worthy of complete faith. Think about that. See, my lack of faith doesn't change his worthiness for me to put my faith in him. See, there's a problem with the relationship, and the problem's at my end. He is worthy. I can trust in him completely, even if my doubts get in the way. He is worthy of all faith. Now, let's be honest. I'd be in the boat with the rest of you while Peter's out there holding on to Jesus. It'd be a pretty amazing thing to see. Sometimes, listen to this, sometimes it's other people going through things that can increase our faith. Here's a good lesson to learn. You can learn and grow from other people's experiences. I wouldn't have gotten out of that boat. But because Peter had the faith to do it, I recognize it's possible. And that helps me understand Jesus. And when they were come unto the ship, the wind ceased. Another miracle happened. Jesus controls the wind. Now, we started out this lesson seeing that Christ was in need of something. It shows his humanity. It almost seems like he has some limitations, doesn't it? No, it's not that he's limited, but even he was in need of time of prayer and fellowship with the Father. But then he immediately demonstrates that there's no limitations, that even in the midst of a storm, he can walk on the water. I have a lot of faith in Jesus because of his ability to do anything. But this reminds me that he is in control of everything. It's easy to walk on water when you created the water. It's easy to calm the storm when the storm's under your authority. It's easy for him to do these things because he's God. And the best thing for me to do is recognize how great he is. The greatest thing for me is knowing this, that this great God loves me. And I have access to him. So here he is, he gets in the water, he gets in the ship, and the storm stops. Now, when I read the Bible, I like to kind of imagine what it would be like if I was there. And I'm just thinking about going from one moment just being scared to death because a horrible storm has come up. Then the next moment, if it couldn't get any worse, here comes a ghost. And then realizing that's Jesus. I would have just seen Peter walk on the water. I would have watched Jesus get into the boat. And now all of a sudden, everything is calm. What would that feeling be like? It's okay. Going from you're about to die, immediately witnessing a miracle, and now, what just happened? Everything's okay. I believe God has the ability to do that in our lives. Now, I want to make this clear though. He's the Jesus that will walk through the storm to you. That will go through the storm with you. He's also the one who has authority over the storm. I am not saying that every time he will end the storm. I always like to look back to the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were about to be thrown into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said something truly powerful. He is able to deliver us from this fiery furnace. But even if he doesn't, we will only worship him. God is able. But God does not always keep us from the storm. God does not always keep us from the fire. God will see us through. He goes through the storm with us. And sometimes that storm can cause devastation. And we can think of many examples, even up to the point of death. But here's the exciting thing about the God that we serve. If those disciples would have went down in the ship, and they didn't because God was not done with them, but if they would have went down in the ship, their hope was that even through death, God would see them through. Think about that for a minute. But fortunately for them, that was not the outcome here. It says that when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. And listen to this. And they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, listen, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Oh, you're just now getting this. This is what it took. You just witnessed him feeding thousands of people with almost nothing. You have seen and heard his miracles. What does it take for you to come to that conclusion finally? When I read this verse, it makes me think, that's the question. What's it going to take for you to get to the point that you trust him? Are you going to have to go through some more storms in your life? Are you going to have to get to the point of desperation? See, there's so many people out there, and I just can't hardly fathom why they think that, well, if I go through enough things, I will eventually look into that. I think it's interesting how many people believe. I just had a conversation with somebody about this the other day. I'll wait till after the rapture happens. Oh, you want to wait till the church is gone and the devil's released, and you think that that will be better. This is a truth. And it's time to look into it now. It's not better to go through more and more storms. It's not better to go through more and more demonstration. How many times are you going to have to put Jesus to the test before you finally believe? And maybe you're here today and you say, I do believe. I do. Or maybe you're here today and you're saying, you know what? I'm looking into it, but I still have some doubts. I want to encourage you today, spend some time crying out to this Jesus who in the middle of the storm looked at Peter and said, Peter, come. Do you think that Peter didn't have access to Jesus on the dry ground? Absolutely he did. But wherever you're at in your life, whatever place you're in, I believe that he will not allow anything to get in the way. And he is saying to you, come. Would you stand with me today? I love this neat